So I like to joke that I'm Monty 2.0. Monty Taylor recruited me at HP and set me working on open source strategy for the CTO of HP Cloud. And then about a month ago, he left and gave me this amazing present of a massive team of upstream OpenStack developers who were totally focused on open source. So I'm having a blast. So many people assume, wrongly, that a company exists simply to make money. While this is an important result of a company's existence, we have to go deeper and find the real reasons for our being. And as we investigate this, we inevitably come to the conclusion that a group of people get together and exist as an institution that we call a company or an open source project. So they are able to accomplish something collectively which they could not accomplish separately. They're able to do something worthwhile. They make a contribution to society. So the author, William Gibson, had a quote that he was fond of repeating around the turn of the century. The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And what that means is there are hints of the future in the past. So as we look to OpenStack's future, it's actually useful to look how we got where we are. And I'm going to go much farther back than you expect, all the way back to the beginning of software, but I'll do it quickly. So the early days of software, this is about from the 40s to the 70s, there was a very slow and regular pace of innovation. And I like to make a comparison of this to traveling at subsonic speeds. The sound travels outwards like ripples out from dropping a pebble, very, very regular. As it starts to speed up, it shifts a little bit. So the middle age of software, this is about, it started really in 1980 with the introduction of software copyright. There's this thing in the speed, when traveling at the speed of sound, all those nice regular sound waves start to bunch up. And they make this very highly disruptive edge at the leading like, right on the object that's traveling. That was known as the sound barrier, and people died trying to break it. They thought it could not be crossed. So that sound barrier is equivalent to the idea that proprietary software was the only way to make software. This started in the 80s, and that was what kicked off the launch of companies like Apple and Oracle and Microsoft. And many of them still have this idea that proprietary software does lead innovation, is the future. But it isn't where we started, and it isn't where we headed. So here's the thing about the sound barrier. It doesn't actually exist. It's an illusion that is only at that very, very tiny point where you are going exactly the speed of sound, because the sound waves catch up with you and they pile up on top of you. As soon as you cross that barrier, as soon as you go slightly faster than the speed of sound, then that disruptive barrier falls behind you, and you zip on ahead of it. So this is what happened it actually started as early as in the 80s. The Free Software Foundation was launched, the GNU project was launched, Perl was started, and then into the early 90s, we had the Linux kernel, we had the Debian project, then we had the Red Hat project, we had Apache, we had MySQL, we had PHP. This whole class of software that was developed not in a proprietary way, not by a single company. And things started to change. At first it was a little bit slow. There was proprietary software had made such a big impact when it hit that there was sort of a lingering effect. It was about 15 years. There was a lingering effect of people thinking, oh, this is the way software must be done. But it was actually only 15 years over a history of 90 years of software development. So that tells you maybe it wasn't such a massive idea as we think it might have been. From about 2000, so 2000 is when the term open source was invented. Free software had already been around for 15 years, so it actually has a much longer history than you might expect. From about 2000 to 2005, we saw people kind of beginning to get interested in the idea of open source. You saw, a tide turning from Microsoft saying, this is the end of software, it's going to destroy all our profits, there will be no future, it'll destroy the market, to people saying, oh, no, this might actually be a new way of driving innovation. This might actually be like a good thing for the software industry. We should keep an eye on this. From about 2005 to 2010, you see this big adoption cycle growing. So a 2010 survey of companies showed about 42% of them using open source. And at that point, people are like, well, we set out with this open source thing to say that we should help companies understand what free software is. So we did. They understand. So we won. Yay, we won. So then what happened, right? Well, here's the funny thing about traveling faster than the speed of sound. It gets easier as you keep going. You get farther and farther away from that disruptive, dangerous sound barrier. It keeps accelerating. So a repeat survey in 2015 shows 78% of companies using open source. About 60% of those now are contributing, but 88% expect to be contributing more in the future. And that's the way we're headed. So there's some interesting pieces to this. There's a law of economic necessity behind this. If all of your competitors are using open source, well, if you're not taking advantage of that rapid innovation, if you're not taking advantage of that completely free resource, then you're lagging behind, and for absolutely no good reason. So it's almost like it's like you have to be using open source. So using open source is now just table stakes. That's just entry into the game, bottom level. The new competitive edge is participation in open source. And that's because if you're just consuming it, you simply kind of have to rely on whatever the open source projects are willing to give you. If you're participating, if you actually have a team of developers working in the project, you get your bugs fixed faster. You get your customers' needs heard better. And you end up helping to move the project forward faster and faster and faster. So one of the messages I have for the OpenStack community is to understand that you're not alone in the world. You are on the leading edge of a trend that has 30 years of power behind it. And in fact, even longer than that, because the original software was also open source, just so you know. So that's something that OpenStack can draw strength from. The history behind it and the overall trend in the industry that open source is the way to drive forward innovation. Open source is the way to deliver your products to your customers faster and cheaper and better. But it's also a caution because there are patterns and there are anti-patterns. So there are things to look out for in the world and things that other projects have been through before. There are pain points that they have solved already that we as the OpenStack community can learn from, that we as the OpenStack vendors and service providers and customers can learn from. So OpenStack is really like a state-of-the-art open source cloud platform. And that's something that's in many ways, it's an example to the industry. And we have to keep in mind that open source has many, many ideas to offer, and we may not have come up with all of them. So containers is a good example. Containers didn't really exist when OpenStack started. They did, but they were not used in the same ways that they are today. And one of the advantages of opening up OpenStack as a big tent, opening up a much wider diversity of projects, is to allow that sort of evolution to happen more easily, to allow ideas that grew up outside to come in and keep OpenStack moving forward and innovating. So we need to open up the doors for evolution in OpenStack, and some of that's going to come from outside, some of that's going to come from inside. So looking towards the future of OpenStack, why are we here? So we have the developers, we have operators, we have the foundation, we have users, we have vendors, we have service providers, we have consultants, we have customers. We are all here together to accomplish something collectively that we can't do separately. The fact that OpenStack is not a single company project, it is backed by some of the largest IT companies in the world, that gives it a strength that it would not have otherwise. It provides choice. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a world where the future of computing is dominated by 3 companies in America. That's actually kind of scary. So, like one example here in Europe, the European Commission is very conscious of this and has last year launched an initiative that is intentionally focused on sort of raising up the diversity of service providers in Europe, and OpenStack is a key piece of this because OpenStack is open cloud. And this goes all the way back to the original launch of OpenStack at OSCON 5 years ago. I was running OSCON at the time, so I helped arrange the launch. This is the key idea of OpenStack. It is open, it is collaborative, it is for everyone. And because of that, we're able to innovate far more quickly. I mean, OpenStack started later than some of the others. It has, and it has come along. If you look at the history of its development, what's been accomplished in the past 5 years is absolutely amazing. So what's next? Well, you've heard several talks this morning talking about the fact that OpenStack is production ready. It absolutely is. HP's been running a public cloud on OpenStack for 4 years. Rackspace has been around a little longer. Nobody's been around much longer since it's only existed for 5. And what this tells everyone is that OpenStack is, we've reached this, there's like a pattern in development. We've reached this crest in the wave. We've hit that really, really hard point. And what comes next is the adoption cycle. So it's ready to start welcoming people. But like open source in 2010, that doesn't mean, we won, yay, we're production ready. That's the start. From there, you have to keep growing. So we're all here to make OpenStack better. That's what I tell my team. They say, make OpenStack better, that is our focus. But also, we're here to collectively get better at making OpenStack. And there are things that we can do to improve. So one of those areas is product management. From the beginning, OpenStack has been very focused on developers, but that led to a weird pattern of development where you'd have product management in each company kind of coming up with ideas, and they'd talk to their developers, and their developers would go to the summits and talk to each other, and there'd be some revision, and then it would kind of go back. But the product managers would never talk to each other, and the engineering managers would never talk to each other. And that leads to some kind of ineffective echo and reverberation patterns that don't work very well in collaboration when you really are collaborating across companies. Together with Sean Roberts and Rob Hirschfeld, last year I launched something called the Product Management Working Group. And the idea is to get companies actually working together directly, collaboratively at the higher level, and then they're not sending the developers all these weird conflicting signals. It's coming along very nicely, and I'd certainly welcome any companies who aren't involved yet, or service providers, or whatever tier you're at, I welcome you to come and join and make sure that you kind of that product level requirements are expressed together. There's also a number of other working groups. There's the enterprise working group, there's the telco working group, there's the operators working group. So part of that moving on through the wave of adoption, moving on to the next level for OpenStack is, so we're production ready, we've got that solid base, now we need to start filling in the specific requirements of specific domains of use for OpenStack. Because its great advantage is being diverse and targeting diverse use cases, so we need to make sure that we tick all those boxes. We need to keep an eye on the technical debt. So 5 years into a project, there's a lot of code, and it's been around for a long time, and it's been touched by a lot of people. And we have a lot of investment in feature development, but not many companies are really investing their developers in just cleaning up things that have been around for a long time, doing refactoring, basic bug fixes. And so all the companies together need to make sure that they are investing resources in that basic maintenance of the code base, because that's what gets us not through next year, that's what gets us through the next 10 years. That's what makes sure we are stable and reliable and mature and solving customers' needs well into the future. And that focus on meeting the customer needs, the thing to remember is this is not a game, we're not just creating code for the fun of it. We're really there to meet customer needs. And this is, people on the ground in the street. So this is people earning their bread and butter by creating services for customers, and they need OpenStack to solve their problems. They need OpenStack to meet their needs. So really making sure we keep in touch with those folks who are using OpenStack and what they're using it for. It's absolutely essential. Steve Jobs calls this the passion for excellence. It's like OpenStack is production ready. That's great, but we want it to be like the iPhone of clouds. We have to keep working on it, keep working on that edge. So this is the way we not just sort of benefit from open source, not just sort of meet the bar, but we want to accelerate the path of cloud innovation using OpenStack. And we really have an opportunity to do that if we go all in. There's a few other things we need to think about. So 5 years into a project, people start to burn out. And that's okay. Nobody has the energy to essentially work on a PhD forever. That's the amount of work it takes to really be a PTL or a core reviewer. It's essentially a PhD degree. Nobody's going to do a PhD degree for 20 years of their life. They couldn't stand it. So you start to see a rotation. And there's some things which is, make sure that we support the developers we have the best that we can, because developers are the most important resource that any open source project has. If you lose your developers, you lose everything. So there's that. There's things like a lot of OpenStack projects now are recognizing that they've grown too big to have a single PTL. So they're sort of introducing additional roles within the project. And that's actually a really good thing to do as an open source project grows, is start sharing the authority. It's also a really good way to identify who the next PTL might be, because whoever was doing this product management role or this sort of coordination role over here, they might show that they were a really good candidate to be the next PTL. So you're like growing up your next generation of leaders as you move forward. And the same is true at an even lower level. So we need to start training developers who are very, very young, because those developers who know absolutely nothing right now, 5 years from now, they're going to be the PTLs. They're going to be the core reviewers. So this is a message for developers to always be mentoring each other, to always be welcoming to new people. It's also a message for companies. So don't just try to hire the PTLs. Don't just try to hire the core reviewers. Try to hire folks straight out of college who seem to have a little Python knowledge or maybe even PHP and seem like they might be able to learn a bit, and actively, consciously train them in OpenStack, give them the resources they need to attend the summits and attend the mid-cycle meetups, and grow into that future developer pool. Because this is how we keep OpenStack going for another 15, 20 years. We need to appreciate diversity, and I don't just mean gender diversity or social diversity or cultural diversity. These are important, and there's actually a diversity working group sort of forming at OpenStack right now, which is really good. It's good for growing our developer base even more broadly. Because the last thing you want to do when you're trying to grow your developer base is like lock out all but about 20% of active developers in the world. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we want to be actively welcoming, but there's another aspect to diversity as well, and that is diversity of use cases, diversity of vendors. The fact that there's a whole bunch of companies here working is a really good thing. The fact that we have smaller service providers all over Europe who are spinning up local private clouds that meet the local laws, that satisfy local customer needs, that can really address that local market, that's really important to OpenStack. And keep in mind, when we talk about all these folks who are entering into the OpenStack market. So Gartner estimates the overall cloud market in 2018 is going to be 40 billion euros. To put that in perspective, Amazon just announced their numbers this year. Their total revenue this year on AWS is about 4 billion euros. So that's really a tiny piece. There's a lot left over for the rest of us to claim by 2018. And I have to tell you that Amazon's not going to own all of that market. No one company is going to own that market. There's plenty of room for all of us to grow in that market. Which means we really have to take the perspective of we're competing, yes, but we're competing in a cooperative way. And in fact, if your competitor is succeeding at OpenStack, is drawing customers into OpenStack, that is good for you. Because when you're trying to drive that adoption cycle, every win, no matter what company makes it, is good for everyone in OpenStack. And we have a really good chance, not of any one company dominating that market, but we have a really good chance altogether of OpenStack dominating that cloud market in 2018. So just to kind of set you back, put you in the total perspective vortex, OpenStack is incredibly important in the universe today because OpenStack is the leading open cloud solution. OpenStack is how we avoid getting locked into a few small proprietary vendors. And it is opening commercial opportunities all over the world, not just for the big IT companies, but all the way down the stack, all the way to the small local mom and pop shop who are helping local small businesses spin up their websites to support their company. So I guess when you look to the future, you try to gaze into your crystal ball and see where you're going. It's a little bit of a passive action, kind of sitting there and it's like, so what will it be? And I want you to take away the perspective that the future is what we make it. We have the choice to make the future, and with OpenStack, we have the choice to make that future open and better for everyone. That's all. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Allison? There's.
Thank you for the speech. What I noticed is that in Holland, the notion of DevOps and having them in enterprises is not a discussion at all. Enterprises are not ready for it. Conferences like DevOps Enterprise Summit, nobody talks about it. You said something about developers, but there's the whole enterprise side of things, the business working together with the developers. Can you maybe comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's right now is a bit of a tipping point for enterprise customers, as well as smaller businesses. They have succeeded in an old way for a long time, and DevOps is a little bit of a new way of thinking about things. They're beginning to get clued into it, and it's happening faster in some parts of the world than in other parts of the world. It seems like the Silicon Valley is like zipping ahead like a rabbit, and the rest of the world is, in some places they're still barely clued into it. But the way that DevOps and cloud succeeds and actually changes the world is not by, sort of an abstract idea, hey, you need to try something new. It's as more and more, it's that same sort of accelerating innovation as more and more businesses succeed and save money by cutting their cost of operations by using a more automated style of IT infrastructure, which is really what cloud offers them. It like sort of cuts their cost of ownership, it cuts their cost of deployment. So as more and more businesses succeed, and folks like Gartner and Forrester and start, publish those results, that's what drives that shift, because those enterprise customers, they really are looking for hard numbers to see, is this going to improve my business? And the answer is yes, it's going to improve their business. But they're a little bit slower and they need to see more evidence. And the evidence is definitely rolling out, and it will become stronger and stronger over the next couple of years. And that's what's going to drive the change.
Just time for one other question.
So this is actually one of the
things... It was just one question, so we don't have that much time.
I'll tell you where to look for it. This is what the product management working group is working on. So part of where that idea came from is what I did at HP when I started developing a roadmap for OpenStack, because I would go out and talk to all the PTLs and say, okay, what are you working on and what's coming? And then I realized it was kind of silly to have one person doing this and only inside one company. So what the product management working group is doing is they're working with all the PTLs to kind of, the PTLs all have these ideas in their heads. They know what they're thinking about 5 and 10 years out, but it's not communicated very well. So that is the product management function, is to kind of pull together those business needs and pull together those engineering plans and like shape it into a roadmap that everybody can read and understand. So they do have, if you go look for the product management working group, they do have some initial drafts up, and they're working on refining that and sort of extending that out farther into the future more clearly. So that's the place to look for it.
Okay, Allison, thank you very much. And I would like to say it's very great to have an enthusiastic analyst here, and it's also a woman here on stage. So again, thank you very much. Right.